This is Monster Manual MASH. This is a podcast where we get into the 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons Monster Manual, and we go entry by entry, creature by creature, talking about the text as presented in the book. What is it supposed to make you feel? How are you supposed to use these monsters? How can you use them better? Where do they come from in myth and religion and history and the perverted imaginations of a bunch of basement dwellers of the 70s and 80s and everything in between? We use armchair psychology. We look at math. We look at other people's work. I look on Wikipedia. I pretend that I knew it already. And I think that's a pretty well-rounded summary. Did I miss anything?
Well, who are you?
Oh, yeah. I'm Chris.
And I'm Wes.
And together we are talking Monster Manual MASH episode 50. Galeb... already flubbed it. There's no way to pronounce this right. Galeb Duhr.
Galeb Duhr. Yeah, I think it's Galeb Duhr. That's what I would say. It might be Galeb Duhr, but I don't know.
Galeb Duhr. Yeah.
I don't know enough about like what that H is doing linguistically there.
Yeah, it is. Neither does the person who wrote it, which we'll get into later. But it's kind of a Lordsies Ringsies thing,
right?
Khazad-dûn,
right? Yeah.
Galeb Duhr. Because it's a made up word. There's no lineage. It's just a fantasy. It's Klingon, basically. So this guy he's a little rock boy. Not to gender them. He's a little rock, but it's hard not to when he's a little rock guy, a little rock friend.
Yeah, he's a little rock guy. And like I don't know when it comes to monsters and critters and and animals and stuff too, I feel like I could feel like if we're talking about a Galeb Duhr, like they're a little rock guy. I feel like when you got little monsters, guy is I like to think of guy as being like an ungendered.
I think guy is gender neutral. I think you're right. Yeah. And this is definitely a little guy, possibly a unit.
Yeah.
According to the book, it is a boulder-like creature with stumpy rock arms and legs. Powerful spellcasters can summon them from the plane of Earth, and they can also form naturally in places touched by that plane. Imbued with greater intelligence than other elementals, so it can better assess threats and communicate. Paragraph 1. Stone Guardian. No aging or sustenance, so for some, they make an ideal guardian. Powerful druids may, for instance, charge a Galeb Duhr with protecting a magic circle or sacred hilltop. You know those druids, they love hilltops. It also says underground tomb or wizard's tower. So they're not just limited to magic hippies.
Yeah, as long as there's a spellcaster and some kind of elevation.
Yeah, up or down. Yeah. It can make itself look like a boulder and sit there for years at a time. They are permanently bound to the material plane, so if it dies and doesn't return to the elemental plane of Earth, which is very different from elementals. They have excellent memory, and they like to help non-threatening creatures. And the second and final paragraph, Stone Connection. It becomes one with surroundings and imbues other rocks with a semblance of life. In effect, that makes it animate two boulders, and it flings them around to scare or attack intruders. And the Galeb Duhr itself, its tactic is to roll into a little ball and roll downhill at enemies. And that's it. That's the little guy. That's the whole thing here.
Yeah, he's a rock guy.
He's a rock guy. But he's a rock guy that's been around since 82.
Yeah.
So there's something about this little guy that makes people want to hang out with him for 40 years. So stat-wise, it's just like he's a medium humanoid, so he's actually pretty big. Like I see that picture and I imagine him as like a little 2-foot.
Yeah. I guess like knowing that he's medium though, it's like so is a dwarf, so we could have like the same dimensions as a dwarf because dwarves are like medium. They're short too, but they're sturdy.
Yeah.
You know. So this guy is also sturdy.
Yeah. It's like a total volume, regardless of shape or something. It has a specific speed for when it rolls downhill, which I really appreciate.
Oh, yeah.
Which, again, I'm really kind of enamored with these things. That they don't turn up very often, but I like unique elements in a stat block. Because no one else has a speed for rolling downhill, but these guys are going to be doing a lot of rolling downhill, and it is helpful to know what that speed is, because it's going to come up. And the attack, it basically doubles the damage dice on a successful hit, and the boulders that it animates, they have the same stats as the Galeb Duhr, but with like no intelligence or 1 intelligence or something, and they can't animate other boulders.
Yeah. I do like it. It's a little rock guy, and it can make even smaller rocks into more little rock guys. Like I want its animated boulders to like also kind of look like it too. You know?
Yeah, like unfinished versions. So this guy, they kind of lay it out pretty simply about what they're supposed to do. They guard things. They make ideal guardians, but you can interact with them because they like to help non-threatening creatures. So this is a good like test for the PCs to find out how shitty they are, possibly. I think it's kind of interesting that they are explicitly they're given more personality, greater intelligence. So they're not just simply an element or an elemental that is just like a animated version of some elements. You know, they have their own thing going on, and if it dies, it dies. Like they are material creatures.
Yeah, and all of their intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. Like their wisdom is a little bit higher; it's 12, but their intelligence charisma is like 11. It's a 0 modifier. So they're basically, in terms of like their personality stats and abilities, right on par with like a commoner. They're a little bit more wise because they're beings of nature and everything, but they're as smart as like a regular person, and they're also as strong and tough with their strength and constitution being 20 as a person could possibly be, which makes sense them being
As the strongest person who ever lived. It makes them very sympathetic.
Yeah,
and it makes you maybe, depending on how you as a DM present them, if you like play up their cuteness or their cheeb factor,
yeah,
make players feel bad for going against them, or it could just be like a fight. Seems like it could go either way.
yeah. And it's one of those, like, it really depends on the context, right? Like, who made them and why? What are they guarding? Like, what kind of place are they in? If like you go up to like, oh hey, we got it. Let's climb this tree, and some rock guys, some boulders around the bit of the tree, get up, and they're little dudes, and like hold up their hands to stop. Depending on the party, but like a lot of people are like, oh, these little guys. Okay, well, I don't want to mess with them. Like they're telling us to stop. But if you're in a dungeon, and there's a chest, and some of the boulders come to life and start coming at you, that's a different vibe. Like it depends on the
That is
context.
true. That is true. Anything in a dungeon is suspect immediately.
Yeah.
And definitely, like, there's got to be some sort of Geneva Convention for like underground dungeon warfare where simply being in a dungeon kind of you waive your rights.
Yeah. And because dungeons are such, I guess depending on like how the dungeon exists in the world, but there's such artificial environments where it's like, okay, well, you built this and filled it full of traps and little guys that want to kill me to like prevent me from getting something at the bottom here. So there's a whole, I feel like there's kind of a social contract in going into a dungeon. It's like, this is a hostile environment. We're adversaries if I'm coming into your dungeon.
Yeah. I'm going to close my eyes and swing my arms, and if you get in the way, that's your own fault.
Yeah.
But if they're just outside, like on a hilltop, and they're all serene, they look like little Celtic gods, like they're of a piece with Stonehenge, or I guess they're most like the heads of Easter Island.
Yeah, but I'm like Stonehenge though. Like if you find a stone circle somewhere in some prominent place, of some standing stones, of some kind, and like one of them like gets up and waves to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely some druid shit right there.
Yeah, and that feels like then you get into possibly like Studio Ghibli territory.
Yeah.
Or something. Maybe not, I don't know. There's just something very like peaceful and kind of reassuring about that, about like these kind but not overly saccharine. They're not overly sweet, like they're still they'll get you.
Yeah.
If it comes to it, but they seem like just at one with nature, which they sort of are by being rock people, but it's they're kind of unique, I think, in the monster manual as like a perfect example of that, because even elementals are like controlled, or they're not really supposed to be there.
Yeah, they're from another plane, but these are of the material plane. Yeah.
They have to be touched by the plane of elemental earth or brought by a spellcaster, but they seem very at home still.
Yeah. And their whole the whole thing, but like because they are like made of stone, they don't need to like eat or sleep or anything like that, and can just sort of exist.
Yeah.
For an indeterminate amount of time. That they're very, it's just like they're around, they're guarding something, but most of the time they're just there to be,
They're just vibing.
Yeah. It's kind of reminds me of have you seen, or anyone who's listening, Everything Everywhere All at Once?
Yes.
So that part where they're rocks?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's probably a good chunk of being a Galeb Duhr, is like, I'm just going to be a rock for 100 years,
It's just existing. Yeah.
Just see what's next.
It's funny, you just mentioned how they don't eat, but there's a bunch of different versions, even within editions, that like could never really settle on what their whole deal was. Like if they eat, if they just vibe on pure energy, or if they like how they get around. So we'll get into it now.
Oh yeah.
So like I said, they turned up in 1982. They were first in a set of monster cards, set number 2 in May 1982. And what is it? Somebody named Harold Johnson oversaw the Monster Cards project, and the new creatures were submitted by various members of TSR's design department, and Michael P. Price is the designer responsible for the Galeb Duhr. So I found a paraphrased interview with him, which is like pretty rare. It's kind of hard to like actually track down who made what in a direct way. The information's out there somewhere, but like hard to keep track of stuff that happened in the 80s. But this guy Price left TSR in 1983. He went on to become a video game designer, retired in 2010, and now he's a digital artist. And he did an interview with Encyclopedia. Sorry, this Monster Encyclopedia article. So his goal in developing the Galeb Duhr was to explore a creature that could naturally blend into surrounding terrain. And he had inspiration from a bunch of different sources, including an episode of the original Star Trek series called The Devil in the Dark. And I've seen this one, and it's freaky, especially when I was a kid. Spock mind melds with a Horta, who is a silicon-based life form that looks like a big, gory pizza pocket explosion.
Yeah, I remember this one.
You know this one?
Yeah.
Kill! Strike back! Monster!
So it's this thing that's been attacking people and like swallowing people, but it's a miscommunication. There's like as with many things in Star Trek, it's not because of innate evil. It is a misunderstanding. So Price, he liked the idea that communication with a creature might not be straightforward, but that the information a D&D creature might be able to share would have value to adventurers. So the idea was, as ancient rock creatures, the Galeb Duhr could fossilize all of their accumulated knowledge to be uncovered by astute players who take the time to communicate with them. So this is why the 5th edition one has this thing about how it can communicate is higher than average or higher intelligence than other elemental type creatures. Another major influence, which I thought of more quickly, which I thought of like right when I was reading it, is that of Tolkien's Ents. He's influenced by Tolkien's Ents, and the relationship that the Galeb Duhr have with stone is modeled on the relationship Ents have with trees. There is also a influence from the sandworms in Dune, as Price wanted them to instill a similar sense of mystery and danger when they were encountered. So we'll get into the name here too. So Price, he liked the foreboding sound of Khazad-dûm from Lord of the Rings, and the sense of power evoked by Muad'Dib, the Fremen name adopted by Paul Atreides in Dune. So his objective was coming up with a 2-syllable, 1-syllable cadence name for the rock creature. His French ancestry helped him settle on dur as the second word, since dur is French for hard. So it is based on something. I forgot about that.
Cool.
Price also wanted a name that felt like it could be Gaelic or Nordic, and eventually settled on Galeb Duhr as being sufficiently unknown and mysterious.
I mean, it's a good name. Like on that criteria, I think it like succeeds as a name based on what kind of name it was supposed to be. So
absolutely, yeah. I think he had achieved his design goals, and it makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, because like before I knew that the name like Galeb Duhr, I was like, it already sounds like the name of something ancient. Like it sounds like like a very old Welsh concept, or like a place somewhere that doesn't like it sounds like something that already exists and is old, like it has that vibe. So great job.
Agreed.
Yeah,
and I like it because we're both fairly nerdy, and we like our secondary worlds, but it can often ring really hollow when you try to come up with like new language conventions. So whenever you're doing that, it is a crutch, but it is a understandable and totally fine one to steal from Tolkien if you're gonna do it.
And if you're gonna like use the idea of invented language to sort of imply even larger world building than you've actually set out to create, you cannot have better examples than Dune and Tolkien for doing that. Like if
you
you're
may
going
as
to be
well.
inspired by anybody for like implied world building, as much as Tolkien actually does go into the details, and there's that like maps and appendices and Dune books and stuff, but like still with any world building, there's more implied world building than actual nuts and bolts world building, I think, when it's any good. Kind of like how a landscape painting, what's really beautiful about it is it implies the whole world beyond the frame, right? So that's kind of that's what I want world building stuff to do. And like so great with just the name Galeb Duhr, I'm like, cool. So that sounds like,
you may as well stand on the shoulders of those giants of literature for your little silly rock guy in a game, because then it's way more evocative, and you already make a connection to things people have probably already read, but in a way that isn't like, you're not totally ripping them off. You're just ripping off the sound and the feeling rather than any particular point.
Yeah. And I really like the idea. I was just thinking of like them being associated with druids too, and druidic is supposed to be a secret language, and so you could have this whole thing where like, okay, no, the name of these rock guys, Galeb Duhr, that's the one druidic phrase that's made its way into common usage, and so because it sounds like the way I would imagine druidic sounding, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. You never see like what the druid language is I guess you don't really see what most of the D&D languages are, and you just like, usually when I'm running a game, it's just like, you don't understand this character. Do you have Infernal or do you have Undercommon or whatever?
Yeah, I've talked to people that whenever they encounter an elf, they use French as Elvish. But yeah,
That
there,
actually
it's also
stands.
it kind of works. Yeah,
That
I
makes
like
sense because you could have like high elf be like Parisian French, and then wood elf is like Quebecois.
yeah, absolutely. And there's also like other languages like thieves can't like in a not another D&D podcast, the way they did thieves can't was just being like really unnecessarily like cagey and vague. So it's like, what we need is if there was a potential to like maybe find something perhaps in a certain set of dimensions that looks like this in an area near or in the general, you just like you add so many qualifiers that make it so vague that you have like so many layers of deniability that's how they did thieves can't. It's just like,
Yeah,
yeah, if you were like, I don't know, trying to do a drug deal over the phone, you think the phone is tapped, so you just need to make sure that you have something your lawyer can point to.
yeah,
That's like the kind of idea of the thieves' cant. So there's different ways you can depict languages, I think,
yeah,
but having Druidic sound like sort of made up Welsh works.
yeah,
Yeah.
100%. The first edition, where they really look like stones, like they look like a piece of Stonehenge just got up and started walking around. So they first appeared in that card set, and the picture of it's just a big rock with a face in the middle covered in moss and two legs. There's no arms.
Oh yeah, totally.
And they are described as 8 to 12 foot tall boulder and has a rocky appendages that act as hands and feet, but the picture only has feet. It is ponderously slow. It only moves half has a half human walking speed, but they're very intelligent. They live in rocky or mountainous areas. Groups of up to 4 of them are occasionally encountered together. When encountered, they are in a lair 15% of the time and may have accumulated up to a dozen gemstones, perhaps a miscellaneous magic item or potion as treasure. So this is AD&D, and they're just set up as like some crazy monsters that you might have to fight to get their stuff. They have they are neutral in alignment, and it isn't clear why you might come into combat with them other than you just want their stuff. But they have a stomp attack which scales according to their size or hit die, and they can cast a handful of earthy spells once per round, as if they were 20th level magic users.
Damn.
And they have the ability to animate 1 or 2 nearby boulders, much like a treant controls trees. The text attributes this ability to the fact that Galeb Duhr can feel the earth power in the rocky areas they inhabit. So originally definitely more of like a Ent, but for rocks,
Yeah, totally.
which is kind of cool. I mean, the thing I like about Ents is that they're tree herders, and they're just like extremely slow.
Yeah.
Whereas boulders, rocks don't live, like they don't eat and they don't grow necessarily. They actually, I think the opposite, right? They like are subject to entropy and
Yeah, they
splitting
erode
off. They
over time
erode.
and split, and then the only way that they could grow is if they like sunk in deeper in the earth where they get like melted and fused together. But then that's a different kind of rock after that.
Yeah. So this
Yeah.
is actually kind of more tragic if you want to look at it as like if they love their rocks and they're hurting them in the same way, but they just can't do anything as they watch like wind and rain slowly destroy
Yeah.
all their
And so
rock
like
herd over thousands of years.
yeah, cuz it's a different sort of perspective on entropy then, right? Because like as because I'm kind of thinking about like if you had like a rock guy, it'd be sort of the difference between the like the role that entropy has in life, like plants and animals and like the life that you see on Earth is like we are leveraging entropy to get access to energy. And so we're like speeding it up in one little
Yeah.
place so that we can slow it down somewhere else. And there's a kind of dynamic dimension to that, right? Like as long as we have the sun, like a giant source of energy going, we can sort of keep it going, right? But if you're a rock guy, there's not that capacity to grow, but at the same time, you don't have the sort of like, you're not as fragile as like a fleshy little guy like us, right? So
Hmm.
you sort of, it's slower, but it's more inevitable because there's no like loophole that you can leverage to like reverse entropy locally, even though it's, increasing everywhere else no matter what. You're just on pace with like the background increase of entropy. Just like slow increase of disorder might take like thousands, millions of years. Like there are parts of the Canadian Shield, I think, that are older than life on Earth, right? But um theoretically, at least, life on Earth could make a spaceship and go somewhere else and live in a Dyson sphere and kind of exist as long as there's stars. But that rock's eventually going to turn into dust. So there's a different perspective on time and entropy, I think, if you're a rock guy.
Damn, dude. You just cracked this wide open.
I've been reading this book called Existential Physics by Sabina Hassenfelder, and there's some great bits in there about how like the only way that we can measure time, like the only reason time goes in one direction other instead of the other direction is like statistical likelihood, because if you stir some cream into some coffee, there's a chance you could stir it and then all the molecules would end up on one side if they're coffee and the other side if they're cream, but like that's really statistically unlikely. Usually you just make a mess and things get all mixed together and smushed and messy, and because it's more likely for things to get random, like a bunch of random different places that end up all in the same place, that's why time goes one direction. So like time is just a statistic. It's just more likely that it goes forward than backwards. And that would be way more obvious to you if you were a rock guy, I think.
Oh, 100%. That's
Yeah.
because this is the kind of stuff you would eventually think of if you just sat for 1,000 years.
Yeah.
You think this
Right?
is what they're doing? This is like what Galeb Duhr, because they're just average intelligence, but these are like, I think if a person of average intelligence sat down for 1,000 years and just contemplated.
Oh yeah. I think so many like famous philosophers were just people not actually smarter than any other average person. They just like had the opportunity to like just like sit and think about stuff for a while.
Yeah.
Whether it's because they you're like Descartes and you're filthy rich and so you can just like hang out and do that, or if you're Spinoza and you got to work all day as a lens grinder but you got time to think about stuff while you're doing that.
Yeah. Or Kant, who was like a mama's boy, wasn't he?
Yeah, mama's boy who walked the exact same route every day. People tie their
Yeah.
watches to him.
Man, that's great. This is a good personality too for a Galeb Duhr. They should be like a philosopher.
Like a blue collar philosopher. Like you ever
Yeah.
work at a factory and there's a guy and he's like, whoever wants to be in charge, all they want is I don't know, I can't like riff a profound thing out of nowhere that like in like a voice. But that's the whole trope of person. I
Oh
feel like
yeah, for
that's
sure. I
the
think they're
yeah.
especially prevalent today with just podcasts or like I hate to keep talking about him, but I find it really funny, the like Joe Rogan effect
Oh yeah.
of like in this example of the blue collar guy, you'll be like, I don't know, you'll be in the dish pit at a restaurant or something, and then the dishwasher will be like, "Hey, do you think we're in a simulation?" You're
Yeah.
like, "I don't know, are we?" And they're
Yeah,
like, "Yeah,
totally.
yeah, we are. It's most likely." So that's kind of what I think a Galeb Duhr would be. So after the initial introduction of Galeb Duhr in AD&D, they start getting. This is where things get split off with like what's their deal actually. In the Temple of Elemental Evil, there are 2 Galeb Duhr, and the description gives them a glimpse of their attitudes, and we learn that they have little patience, but are generally only hostile to those who feed on stone or gems. So they are opposed to mineral eaters, and they are willing to provide aid in return for information about offenders. So in this version, they have little patience, which is kind of a funny thing for a rock guy. And they want to beat up like whatever monsters eat minerals, which I guess is I think the Zorn do that.
Oh yeah.
But I've never really I've always found it kind of uninteresting, the ecologies within the elemental plane of Earth. You read enough bestiaries and enough D&D, and you get into like these creatures from the elemental plane of Earth eat minerals. And that's like as far as we've come.
Yeah, and it's not like terribly interesting because then you're just like describing organic life, but then switching the substance around. You know?
Yeah.
It's like, no, this is different and cool because these are rock tigers that hunt rock people, you know? And it's like, okay, well, so they're made of rocks instead of flesh, but it's the same thing. Okay, I don't know.
Exactly. It's it's kind of funny in a way, but it's also like you're kind of limiting yourself.
Yeah.
There was a magazine called Polyhedron, and in that there was an adventure called Needle, which was later published in a standalone form. Part of that story takes place on the moon of the PC's homeworld, and the inhabitants of that moon include Galeb Duhr, who are able to inhabit both the air-filled tunnels and the airless surface of the moon, and there they have adapted to lunar life, which is pretty. I think that's great, especially for like an early adaptation of the idea.
Oh yeah. I love the idea of like, so you got your fantasy world, but it's also just like a planet, and like the moon is it like a vacuum, but like putting fantasy stuff on like a moon that acts like a regular moon, like it's a hard vacuum, there's like intense radiation, so you'd have to be a rock person to like live up there or have some kind of magical spacesuit. And how do you even get up there? Teleportation magic maybe, but you can teleport up there with like, I don't know, dimension door or something. But then careful because you can't actually live up there. Like I don't know. And that there could be like a moon kingdom, but it takes like special equipment and magic to like live up there, but it's not sci-fi, it's still fantasy. I think there's stuff you can do there, especially with Galeb Duhr, you know?
Yeah, because they are they're kind of, to me, representative of like the natural energy or the natural animism of the earth expressing itself. And it's interesting to then have them show up on the moon, because it's like we're so like earth centric in our thinking.
Yeah.
That to then see them on the moon as like their own, doing their own thing completely separate, it really opens up your idea of like what is possible in the cosmos, what's actually going on in nature, because it's like the moon itself has a power and its own energy and its own ecosystem that we aren't a part of, but these creatures who are like of the rock of the moon itself indicate that there's a lot more going on.
Yeah. It's like, why would nature stop at Earth's atmosphere? Isn't the rest of the universe nature too, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes you think.
Which, if you were like, because I know there's a circle of stars, druids. Imagine like a druid, but the aspect of nature that they're like attuned with is outer space, like asteroids and gas giant planets, and they have access to some kind of magical sort of telescope, and they just like essentially it's like the magical aspects of astronomy, right? Like not astrology, but like they're like this sort of environment that they're attuned to is I don't know. I think there's something there.
There is. It might risk destroying the entire house of cards that fantasy is built on.
Yeah, that's true.
Because for a couple of reasons. One, I think usually like space is reflected in fantasy. It's been sort of turned into a Cthulhu thing.
Yeah.
Of unknowable cosmic horror.
Yeah, or it's the astral plane and you're doing a spelljammer thing. But yeah.
Yeah. But once you start breaking it down into something that is actually knowable, then you start getting into like, well, why are we still wearing leather? If like we can now understand like all these movements of the planets. I mean, I guess that ship has sailed a long time ago with all kinds of other magical stuff, but
but you could even be like like what if you're like so you're the wizard or the druid or whatever type of like magical intelligence, adventurer, and like this aspect of reality. You're like Galileo or something, like this stuff that nobody else does. Doesn't mean everybody believes you though, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. There's no infrastructure to like implement your ideas necessarily.
Yeah. You could be like a alchemist artificer, and like I invented penicillin, but nobody will believe me. No one will use it.
No one will believe me, and there's like a dragon trying to eat me.
There's a dragon trying to eat me. I can't get anybody to believe me about germ theory.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the idea of like a dorky astronomer druid. I don't know why they have to be dorky. I gotta take it easy on scientists. There was another Galeb Duhr in Needle. There's one in particular named Caleb, who is initially hostile, annoyed by the sounds the intruding adventurers are making. But if they communicate with him, possibly using tongues because they have no language in common, he becomes quite chatty. And his animated boulders also have names, Thugga and Thuggy. So again, interesting point of the difficulty of communication, and communication being the key to an encounter. Whereas like this would be hostile, except that now if you can communicate somehow, in this case using a magic spell, it's no longer a hostile situation.
Right, yeah, because on the stat block they only speak Terran.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's definitely something that you should do, and is like halfway implied in the text, which is a pattern. And sort of one of the points of this podcast is like drawing out these ideas. Is like it's like a passing reference to how they communicate, but like let's make it explicit. They don't speak common, and it's unlikely that people don't usually take Terran as a language. In my experience, usually this can be solved with a magic spell in this case, but then that's cool because then you get rewarded for having that spell ready, and it's a neat thing that you've done. But you could also get into like that episode of Star Trek Next Generation, Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra. Do you have any idea what I'm saying to you?
Was that the one we were...
No, that was the one I was talking about earlier. That was the original series.
Yeah.
It's a sort of thing that if you would instantly know it if you were more familiar with Next Generation, I think. But it is a famous episode, famous among people who know it already. It's one of my favorites. It is, I think, regarded as one of the best episodes of the Next Generation, where the captain gets stuck on a planet with another alien humanoid who is also stuck there, but they can't. They share a grammar, but they don't share a vocabulary.
Is this the one where there's the language that's entirely based on references to other?
Yes, that's the other thing, is that the guy can only speak in metaphor. So he's like, so what's going on? Like, how are we gonna deal with this? And the other guy's like, Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra. Like he can't like say anything else, and then the whole episode is just Picard figuring out like what he means, and it's such a triumphant episode.
Yeah,
and it's just one of the best works of like televised science fiction, I think. So you could watch that episode, and then I forget what the actual name of it is. It might be called Darmok and Jalad or something, but you won't have trouble looking it up, and it would be a great basis for an encounter like this.
Yeah. And it kind of reminds me of the movie Arrival too, if you've seen that.
Okay,
one.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, in that,
Good call.
like, we've got to translate the alien language. We don't have a whole lot of reference points. So, like, where do you start?
Yeah, you can get really weird with this if you want it. This might bore the shit out of some players who just want to attack something.
Yeah.
But you can get really weird because the cool thing about Arrival was they don't even have a verbal language, right? It was like they had a written language?
Yeah, they had that ink they could suspend in air, and it was like these circles within circles, and it was a
and it
language
would move, right? Yeah.
It would move because it was a language that was four-dimensional, and so once you understood the grammar of the language, you could see forward and backward in time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Easier just to speak tongues, but
yeah, it's true. But speaking tongues, that's another great thing, because here's a little DM tip, I think, because there's a lot of spells in Dungeons and Dragons that are hyper situational and are like, they do a really cool thing, but it depends entirely on the game master setting up a pretty specific situation where it's cool to have that spell. So like maybe occasionally, like, take a look at your players' spell lists, what they have prepared, or just what they could prepare, and like give them a reason to take that weird niche super situational spell, you know?
Yeah, that's helpful, because I usually like, in an effort to discourage taking on more work as a DM, I usually like do not look at anything on my players' sheets.
Yeah.
Or if I describe that they get an item or something, like, I do not keep track of it. If they forget they have it, then great.
Yeah.
But like, that would be good, especially for maybe newer players, and you want to draw out things in the game for them to use and think about. That's a good idea.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the principle of like shoot the monk, if you know about this one, because monks have the ability to catch projectiles and throw them back at the person that shot at them. So like, that's cool. But like, if you're a dungeon master, then you should shoot at the monks, because the monks have this cool class ability. They want to be able to use it,
so they can use it.
Give people opportunities to do the cool stuff that their character can do. So if you're like a very utilitarian, like problem solving wizard, who can like do all these outside of combat things, give them puzzles they can use their magic to solve, you know?
Yeah, and then justify it through the NPC or enemy, like what they're thinking, because they don't know a monk can catch a bullet, or even if they do, they might have panicked in that moment and they're just trying to like hoping he fucks up.
Yeah.
In Dungeon Magazine number 73, there's an encounter which ignores an ecology article that claims Galeb Duhr don't sleep, because the adventurers are required to awaken a deeply sleeping Galeb Duhr by shouting loudly. I don't know why that's important, but that's what they wanted you to do. And there's also an adventure called Axe of the Dwarvish Lords that has a detailed encounter with a Galeb Duhr who is feuding with a group of goblins. His singing is described as sounding like a soft, melodious landslide, which is pretty cool. And he keeps gemstone treasures hidden in his body.
Oh, that's cool. Like jewelry would be like a gold vein going through your body. That's cool.
Yeah, then that's when you get like players talking about like, do we crack this sucker open? Are we good? Are we evil? What's going on?
That is
here?
asking for trouble, putting any precious material inside of your body.
Oh, for sure.
In a world where there are adventurers.
Yeah, it's a classic. There is an adventure called Castle of the Blind Sun in Dungeon Magazine number 49, because previous articles said that they ate rocks, despite that earlier thing I said about how they hate mineral eaters. But there's other articles that say they eat rocks. But then this one, Castle of the Blind Sun, they only need to maintain contact with earth power to sustain themselves. So this one, they just vibe. And it's interesting, the difference between like how people conceive of a monster ecology, where it's like people who are more have more taxonomic thinking, maybe, or more literal mindedness, require, well, if it's a being, it has to eat something, and if the rock guy, maybe it eats rock things. And then you have this more like hippie version where it just needs to like maintain contact with earth power, whatever that is, which is more of a 90s idea. And sure enough, I think this is made in the 90s.
Yeah. It just gotta hang out on a ley line, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Listen to Enya. That adventure revolved around a castle that becomes solid during a solar eclipse, and this occlusion of the sun causes the Galeb Duhr to become temporarily dormant, which is, I think, a riff on the trolls in The Hobbit turning to stone in the sunlight. So this is like a thing where they're already stone guys, but instead of turning into creatures, they just animate and remain stone guys. And then in 3rd edition, they finally look like rocky human beings, but with arms, but not much else is different. They look like, rather than like mostly a boulder body, they have like a humanoid body. And then in 4th edition, like many other creatures, the things that they were normally associated with are split up arbitrarily between different entries to better make a like a skirmish game. So you have a Galeb Duhr that throws rocks, and a Galeb Duhr with a melee guy and a spellcaster, but they all kind of just split up the things that a Galeb Duhr could already do before. But they really go in a different direction with the background of them. So there's a confusing line that starts by noting that all dwarves were long ago slaves to the giants and titans, and then continues with the following sentence. More than one variety of dwarf failed to escape during the initial revolution, including the Galeb Duhrs, which means that apparently Galeb Duhr are a type of dwarf, despite there being no mention at all of this relationship anywhere else in the monster entry. And except for, there's a player's handbook racial description for dwarves, where it says that a Galeb Duhr are indeed a form of corrupted dwarf, tracing their origins back to the days of dwarven servitude to the giant races. But Michael P. Price, the Galeb Duhr's creator, is not a fan of this interpretation, noting that the idea that Galeb Duhr are some type of corrupted dwarf is, quote, completely arbitrary and makes a mockery of the entire history of this creature, end quote.
I love somebody that stands by their creations, you know?
Absolutely. I love, yeah, this is why we have this podcast. Like, I want to let these people fight.
Yeah.
And I think it is true. I don't think it makes any sense. And then you get into like weird racial corruption, like
Totally.
Stay away from that.
Just which is like that's like, I don't know, I feel like that's the weakest point in Tolkien's world building, is like all these, some of the races are corrupted versions of other ones. Is like, come on, you know?
Well, in the elves case, if you consider them as like angels, if you consider them as more of their like idealistic representation, then it makes more sense. But that's also not
that makes more sense.
Necessarily
but
explicit.
Then there's also like, and then there's also the bit about how like I think trolls are corrupted ents in some way too.
Yeah,
I don't know, but
and orcs are corrupted elves as well.
Yeah.
You know. But then, it gets muddied. It gets muddied.
Yeah.
I'm not the best.
My point is that's not the point of inspiration
yes.
to take from Tolkien.
Yeah. There's no need to do this. But this is one of the things that happen. We talk about a lot. They like need to interlace the ecologies of these things and just create like connections where there's no need for one, just to like make it seem like a living, breathing world. But as usual, I'm more in favor of letting things stand mythically on their own.
Yeah.
Speaking of, we'll get into the mythological background of these guys, which I don't think there isn't anything direct, especially since we got that interview with the creator. Like, we kind of broke down why he did what he did. He just liked the idea of like creatures that looked like the terrain they were in. The examples I could find, there's actually very few rock people in myth, or at least easily Googled. So there is a Incan and pre-Incan story about the first people who were made by Viracocha. In the beginning, there was only darkness. Then Viracocha came from Lake Titicaca and formed the earth and the skies. He then made animals and a group of giant people. These giant people did not please Viracocha, He didn't like them because they were thoughtless and unkind. The way of the giant people angered the god so much that he destroyed them all. I think this is a explanation for the mountains, I believe, is commonly accepted. There's no way to tell for sure, but very often dead giants are mountains in these kinds of stories. He also destroyed all the animals and every other living thing. Just really wasn't happy with that batch. He did continue to create parts of the world, and with a wave of his hand and word, he created day by making the sun rise from an island in Lake Titicaca. He created the moon and the stars, and he set each form of light on its own path. He created streams and rivers. He made and moved mountains and valleys. He made animals to replace the ones he had destroyed. He first made birds to fly in the sky and fill the air with song. He gave a different song to each type of bird, and he makes people once again. He uses stone to form men, women, and children. He then paints them as he wanted them to look, with some of the stone women pregnant. Other stone women were already caring for young children in cradles. He painted on the clothing that each person would wear, and he fashioned them as they would be in life. He then created a stone village for the stone people to live in. He divided them into groups, each with their own food and language and their own songs, and he directed all of them to sink underground and ordered them to stay there until he or one of his helpers called them. And then he got his helpers to walk in different directions from Lake Titicaca, and when they arrive in your own land, call forth the stone people. So the helpers did as they directed, and then one by one, these groups of stone people came up from the ground. And then he said to them, I command human beings to come out of these stone figures, live on this land, live here and have your children. And so the stone people turned into human beings under the direction of sort of like God helpers in these different regions. There's not much direct connection to the Galeb Duhr, other than you have like a primordial source, whereas the Galeb Duhr are like elemental spirits. The people in this story were originally kind of rocks given spirit, but there's no treasure or hurling boulders, so there can't be too much connection. There's also the rock giants. So have you ever heard of the Book of Enoch?
Yes.
Cool. So this is an article I got from biblicalarchaeology.com. So buckle up. I'll just read a bit of this article. Who or what are the rock giants in Noah, the movie? Which, have you seen that movie?
No, I have not.
It was a big old movie.
Yeah.
It's got like an action poster. It was released in theaters. Big movie. Darren Aronofsky, but like it just confounded most viewers and critics.
You know,
I think.
I never saw it with sound, but when I worked at HMV, it was
amazing
playing on. There's like TVs in there that would occasionally just like play a movie that was for whatever reason, like either a new release or like they wanted to promote it, whatever studio. So I looked up at times and saw parts of that movie with no sound.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Well, this might shed some light and help you maybe better understand it.
Okay.
In the Book of Enoch is an apocryphal book concerning details of the flood narrative and elaborating on what was revealed to Enoch in heaven. I don't know who Enoch is. I'm not going to get into that right now, but in this expansion of the flood account, we are introduced to the Watchers, who are fallen angels who mated with human women and produced offspring called the Nephilim.
Nephilim, yeah.
The Nephilim. The heroes that were of old, warriors of renown of Genesis 6:4. They are just commonly referred to as giants. The Book of Enoch states that the Watchers shared secret knowledge with their sons that led to the corruption of the world. The giants ravaged the earth, filling it with destruction and evil. They depleted the world of food and terrified mankind, and these actions triggered the flood. When Enoch confronts the Watchers about their impending doom, they implore him to intercede on their behalf. He agrees, but to no avail. The Watchers' petition is not granted. They and their sons are not able to escape their punishment, the flood. Returning to our earlier question, who are the rock giants in Noah? They're called fallen angels and are based loosely on the watchers we see in the book of Enoch. So these rock people are actually fallen angels. Again, not really connected to Galeb Duhr as we understand it, except that they are spirits from some other place. But in this, it is I guess the D&D equivalent would be some sort of astral plane or some sort of domain of a particular god. But
yeah,
we separate these ideas in D&D, gods from nature or the elemental planes. Giants are a whole thing. There are people alive currently posting on Twitter about the existence of giant angels used in militaries in the Middle East.
Well, Enoch was Noah's great-grandfather.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he's family, he'll know.
The hearing that story makes it, I guess this is always like kind of obvious, but like how much of the plots of the Diablo games is lifted directly from like
Apocrypha, like Christian.
Apocrypha, just like Christian mythology in general, because like literally just the Apocrypha of the Abrahamic religions, really.
In general.
The essential plot. It's great, like material to draw from, and like literally you're playing a Nephilim in the Diablo games. That's why.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you're that's why you're so much more powerful than all like the randos, because you are descended from the offspring between demons and angels who decided not to fight anymore.
Amazing.
And then they created which is essentially the material plane to be like, we're gonna hide this from heaven and hell so that it doesn't get caught up in their war. And then hell is like, well, hey, hang on a second, we want to take
what's
over
this
Earth.
Over here?
Yeah. And then the angels are like, you can't have it, but we're not going to intervene. And so anyway, I don't need to go over the plot of the Diablo games, but it is it's very similar to much of the Book of Enoch, down to you are a Nephilim in those games.
The Nephilim is definitely an idea that's permeated a lot of other fantasy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Another rock myth involves Rhea, who is born to the earth goddess Gaia and the sky god Uranus. So she is one of their Titan children, one of their 12 or 13, depending on the story. So Kronos, one of the youngest children, overthrows his father and becomes king of the Titans in his place. And he takes his sister Rhea to wife. Gaia and Uranus tell Kronos that just as he had overthrown his own father and became ruler of the cosmos, he was destined to be overcome by his own child. So as each of his children was born, Kronos swallowed them. Rhea, with the help of Uranus and Gaia, devises a plan to save the last of them, Zeus, by giving Kronos a stone wrapped in swaddling clothes, which he swallows quickly. And then they hide Zeus in a cavern on the island of Crete. Again, not a Galeb Duhr. Unless the Galeb Duhr you meet is like was swallowed by a god like 10,000 years ago and finally like made his way. That could be like a funny background story of like his last job. Like what was the like his origin story was he was a stone swallowed by a god in a convoluted cosmic drama.
Yeah. That'd be, oh man, because like part of the Galeb Duhr thing is because you're a stone, you can like you can have been alive for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, right? So like I like the idea of like you know how some reptiles and birds will swallow some stones to help them digest stuff? I think they're called gastroliths. You could have just like spent some time as the gastrolith of some kind of cosmic being.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or even some like regular giant creature, but like I
spent 1,000 years in the cosmic turkey.
Yeah.
And then outside of like the myth of gods, you can look at the terracotta army as protectors made of stone.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's an intention of like the stone soldiers weren't actually meant to be the protectors necessarily. They're just kind of like a more of a tribute
Yeah.
and a grand show.
I think there's we kind of touched on it earlier when we were talking about the Star Trek episode with the silicon based life. But I think
Hmm.
outside of mythology, some of the inspiration could be some of the actual like theoretical astrobiology about like what silicone based life could be, right? Because you sort of need we need water and carbon for like the chemistry that makes life on Earth work, just because of the kinds of reactions that can happen, which is normally why people look for places with those elements to find what planets are going to maybe have life on them. But you can get like really, really similar chemical reactions with I think it's ammonia and like silica based like molecules instead of carbon based ones. And so if you had a planet with like oceans of ammonia and a bunch of basically sand everywhere, you could have that could evolve into life too. And if you imagine it, like a lot of the artist depictions are like a living rock, you know,
Hmm.
with ammonia veins. And I feel like that's been taken a lot of different directions in science fiction, but the idea of ammonia based life is like it's about 100 years old, if not older, just because we know the chemistry would work. So I don't know, that could be like a lot of the inspiration for like rock dudes that you see in modern fiction is like, well, yeah, because there could be rock if there was silica based life in the universe. It kind of stands to reason that they would look like little rock guys of one sort or another.
That'd be cool. That's an
Yeah,
interesting take on it, because then instead of them being like a guardian of something else, it's like they fell from the sky on a meteor or something and are now in this, to them, alien world. And
yeah,
they just like are sitting there maybe trying to find a way home or just dealing with this. And then they would attract maybe druids and worshippers who like want to gain knowledge of the outside nature of the world by studying them, or wizards would be studying them or something. And they're just
yeah,
these.
and like the druids and wizards could sort of have it be like, well, what, because they might not have an idea of like what another planet is, right? But if there was a way to travel to another planet, and there was a planet that was full of silica based life, and you're a regular wizard, you're a regular druid from like the material plane, you look at that and think like this has got to be the material plane of like the elemental plane of Earth, right? So like something from that world, or like even stones with like the living ammonia goo of whatever it is in it, like that could be, you know, like how else would you interpret that as like you know, a druid or a wizard? Then like, yeah, no, this is stuff touched from the other plane, you know.
Yeah.
You don't even have to explain that to the players, but I like that as an interpretation of like, kind of like how when medieval people found fossils of dragons, fossils of dinosaurs rather, it's like these are dragons. This is what these are, you know?
Yeah. This proves a whole element of our like cosmically insane our like bizarre understanding of the cosmos.
Yeah,
This validates it.
yeah. Of course, you could go down whole like ancient aliens interpretations of that line of thinking, but I don't know. In a tabletop game, it's cool.
Yeah, in a tabletop game, it's like possible. Maybe this rock
Yeah,
dude was hanging out and did help someone build a pyramid.
yeah.
Outside of these, in popular media, I thought of two in particular. One is the Thing from the Fantastic Four,
Oh yeah, yeah,
who is, I don't think there's no like metaphysical philosophy behind being a rock. I don't think. Like he's not connected to earth power. I don't think.
yeah.
But it's
I don't
more of
know.
like a symbolic hardening of his emotions and him dealing with the fact that he's like he's an ugly monster.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it might depend on who's writing
Oh,
the
yeah, for
Fantastic
sure. I
Four,
just I'm not
like what
as
his whole deal
familiar.
is. Yeah,
But the stuff I remember is that he's just a big goon
yeah,
who has to deal with being a big goon, and he has to be tough, and he has to learn to like be okay with not having the looks, you know. So he has to insulate his emotions and body to deal with it.
Yeah.
There's no hippie angle, but there probably is in some story, but that's, I don't think, the main thrust of Ben Grimm.
Ben Grimm, I forget that's man.
It just came to me. I forgot his name till just now, but
Yeah.
Ben Grimm, good name. And then the most one-to-one connection, I think, is the rock biter from the Neverending Story.
Oh yeah.
Because he's kind of like a melancholic spirit of the earth. And even though he's like an immovable force, even he is susceptible to the power of the nothing.
Yeah, well, there we are. Rock's relationship to entropy, right?
Yeah.
These hands, these look like such, like, oh man.
These strong hands.
I couldn't hold on to them. The nothing pulled them right out of my hands.
Yeah, it's really sad.
Yeah.
And there's no explicit like hippie earth power, but there is like the suggestion that the rock biter represents the like power of nature itself, or the ground, the very earth you stand on.
Another example that comes to mind, I think, are I think they're called the Goron, the rock people from the Legend of Zelda games.
Okay, yeah, that rings a bell.
They're rock people. They hang out in and around volcanoes. I think they might eat rocks. They definitely have the ability to curl up into a ball and roll places to get there faster.
Yeah, that's important.
Yeah.
That's sort of like, I also dug into Neverending Story 3 has a bunch of baby rock men.
Oh man, I forgot there was a third one.
I've never seen it, but I saw a clip of the baby rock men and they're on tricycles set to a rendition of Born to Be Wild, which I don't think is relevant to any of the themes and ideas from the first one. So yeah, I think the Galeb Duhr is, I didn't know much about them before I dug into this. Now I quite like them.
Yeah, love a little, put some little rock guys in your next game.
Sprinkle them in, throw a little pepper on. Next episode, we are getting into another rock guy, getting into the gargoyles.
Yeah.
And it hasn't happened yet, but fingers crossed it goes off without a hitch. We're going to have a special guest, someone qualified to talk about the conception of gargoyles for the purposes of a D&D game.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
Someone who's written about them, who helped. I got to prepare what I say more, so stop iterating as I'm talking. But it is somebody who has written for D&D about gargoyles. So we look forward to that. Beyond that, I'm satisfied.
Yeah, me too.
Okay.
Rock guys.
Rock guys. Let him in.
Let him open up. Let the rock guys
Open
in.
up.
What are you doing? Let him in.
Take us away, Wes.
All right, Chris and everyone listening at home, monsters away.
Monster Manual MASH is Christopher Lawson and Wes Grist. Edited by me, Chris Lawson. Find me on Twitter at Chris M. Lawson. Music by Wes, aka Elias. You can find more of his music on bandcamp.com/Elias. That's numeral 0 LIAS. It's not a hacker thing, it's just what was available. Thanks to Sarah B. Milner for our logo. You can find her at Sarah B. Milner. Thanks to everyone listening, and to everyone talking monsters on the Monster Manual MASH Facebook group, Monsters 2.